Bring out your dead! 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 Ninepence. Bring out your dead! Bring out your dead! Bring out your dead! Bring out your dead!
Here's one.
Ninepence.
I'm not dead.
What?
Nothing. Here's your ninepence. I'm not dead.
Here. He says he's not dead.
Yes, he is. I'm not.
He isn't?
Well, he will be soon. He's very ill.
I'm getting better.
No, you're not. You'll be stone dead in a moment.
Oh, I can't take him like that. It's against regulations.
I don't want to go on the car.
Oh, don't be such a baby.
I can't take him.
I feel fine.
Well, do us a favour.
I can't.
Well, can you hang around a couple of minutes? He won't be long.
No, I've got to go to Robinson's. They've lost 9 today.
Well, when's your next run?
Thursday.
You think I'll go for a walk?
You're not fooling anyone, you know. Look, isn't there something you can do?
I feel happy. I feel happy.
Oh, thanks very much.
Touch off. See you on Thursday.
Right.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Lucky Paper Radio, the Magic the Gathering Cube podcast that cares about your feedback. I'm your host, Andy Mangold, and I'm here as always with my co-host, Anthony Maddox, who cares so much about your feedback and wants to hear if you have any issues with this podcast at all. He asked me to give out his personal cell phone number. But if you have any problems with this episode, just give him a call or text, and he's happy to address them.
Why did you do that?
We'll have Matthew bleep it out.
Yeah, of course. And if you need any adjustments to the list formatter, please feel free to call me anytime, day or night.
24/7.
24/7. You know, it's funny because it's not like anybody answers their phone in 2025 anyway.
Yeah, you're not
and I get calls from, I don't know, weird robots all the time. So it wouldn't really change my life at all. So, sure.
I have to cop to at least half stealing that bit from Blocked Party, which is a podcast that no longer has a main feed. They still do shows for their Patreon subscribers, but they don't actually release a podcast to the public anymore. They would change their intro every year, and one year they just made the intro the cell phone number of their producer to tell people if they had any problems to give him a call. And people would call him and text him, and their show was more popular than ours in terms of like reach, and I think he got quite a few texts and phone calls from people. So
that makes sense. People love to just call somebody up.
I did think it was a funny bit because I think this might be one of our most controversial episodes.
You know, I don't think that's true, but I think that what will be controversial is whatever you title the Reddit post. I think people are going to respond to that title and not respond to the actual episode, which is, you know, how posts on Reddit about our podcast go generally. So fine.
Yeah, I think this is up there probably with Vintage Cube Sucks in terms of, I do think this actual topic is going to be somewhat controversial. Because today we're going to talk about the death of Magic, or what might happen to Cube and other community-organized sort of grassroots formats that don't, you know, suffer under the bright gaze of Wizards of the Coast directly. What might happen to those formats in a world where Magic the Gathering just stopped printing new cards? There was no more new Magic stuff and no more organized Magic events.
Yeah, I mean, we often talk about how Cube could outlive Magic, and there's a couple different ways that you could define that, but the idea being, one of the ways to interpret that is just like, yeah, we kind of can just keep playing Cube. Like, all these cards they've printed still function. We don't need necessarily an organized play structure. We don't need new cards being printed in order to still make Cube a great game and to make Magic a great game that we enjoy. But it came up, there was a conversation in our Patreon Discord about, well, is that actually true? Like, if they just turned off the hose, if they literally just said, we're not making any more new Magic cards starting now, and I think we should answer some other nuanced questions about what that means in a second, but would people like us still keep playing Magic? And like, what in general would the shape of the player base look like? And how long would it take for people to ultimately just stop playing the game if that's the case?
Which I think is a conversation, you know, partially just talking about hypotheticals, playing out, you know, this theoretical scenario. But it's also a question that I think has very real, immediate lessons you can take away in terms of organizing your own local community. Because for many intents and purposes, like, we kind of pretend like Magic doesn't exist already as far as our local playgroup is concerned, at least like the Cube part of our local playgroup. So I think there's something to be said there about like recognizing your relationship to the game more broadly and maybe understanding different ways that you could relate to it in a hypothetical world where you didn't even have it to rely on.
It's also just really interesting to me to think about sort of like system dynamics and the way that this group of people that is Magic players exists at all. And it's like, by doing this hypothetical thought experiment of like, how would that change the player base? I think that leads us to ask some interesting questions about what that player base looks like when it does. So we're not saying Magic is dead. We're not saying Magic is going to die. And obviously,
well,
if
it is going to
did,
die.
When it does, it's not at all going to look like this. It would definitely be like a slow decline. So this is just a big, like, hypothetical thought experiment.
I do want to put a couple caveats out here just to...
Hey, I love that.
Just to
I'm
sort
a
of
fan.
just to sort of head off some of the most obvious criticisms at the pass. And the first one, which is, I just want to clarify, we do not want Magic to die. We love Magic, which sounds crazy to think we have to clarify that because we spend many hours of our life every week producing a podcast dedicated to Magic the Gathering and Cube. We organize our own local playgroup. It's one of our sort of biggest social circles in our lives in our city, and one of the things we spend the most time sort of putting social energy towards. We love this game. We don't want it to die. I say we have to say that because we try to focus on the parts of the game we love the most. We try to like do episodes about cube design and like, really focus on things we get excited about. Every once in a while, we will talk about our relationship to the game more broadly. And you and I both have taken a lot of distance from the game more broadly and have some criticisms of the way that the game has been developed over the past couple years. And people always, in the comment sections of those posts, are like, these guys don't even like Magic. And it's like, what are you talking about? Of course we like Magic. We love this game. It's like the best game ever. And we are dedicating so much of our lives to talking about it. We love this game. We do not want Magic to die.
Okay, so if Wizards of the Coast just stop bringing
Is that the only
cards,
caveat you want to do?
Yeah, I think that's good. Let's jump into it. I'm just curious to get your perspective
All right,
on
fine.
this.
No more caveats.
So let's not do caveats. Let's do clarifications. Does this also mean that organized play has been turned off? There's no more organized events like GPs, Worlds, Pro Tours. Are those gone too?
Well, there are some of those events that rely on Wizards of the Coast and some that don't.
That was my next question, is does Star City Games still exist? But first, answer my first question.
The Star City Tours doesn't exist anymore anyway. That's been gone for years.
Oh, that's... Oops.
Yeah, no, they
okay.
They're basically just a card reseller now. They don't do their
Interesting.
Star City Games tour anymore. They also got rid of all of their content creation. They don't have people wear articles anymore. Like, they don't do that
I knew
anymore.
about the content side of it. So are there still like organized... I mean, they were the ones that were keeping Vintage alive, right? In an organized sense?
Yeah, Vintage is not alive, brother.
Vintage is not alive. Okay, great.
No,
I'm learning so much. This is why I love
Eternal
doing
Weekend.
this podcast.
Eternal Weekend happens... There's an Eternal Weekend in North America once a year. There's an Eternal Week in Europe once a year. I think there's also maybe one in Japan. Sound off in the comments. From listening to the Eternal Glory, I believe that Eternal Weekend is basically the time to play large-scale, organized Vintage. That is the one time you can do it, is Eternal Weekend. They also have Legacy there, but there are more opportunities here and there to play Legacy.
Mm-hmm.
There are like other sort of smaller events that are playing Legacy. But yeah, I mean, Vintage is not a thing.
Okay, great.
And like, to be fair, how could Wizards of the Coast possibly like sanction a Vintage event and like
Of course,
imagine the article titles of like Wizards of the Coast sanctions event that you must pay $45,000 as a like bear. I know there are budget Vintage decks. I know there are powerless budget Vintage decks, but the average Vintage deck is going to have a full set of power basically, and that costs as much as a very nice car or a down payment on a very nice house. So the idea that they would like spend any time organizing that format, like, it is already dead, which is part of why this conversation is interesting to me, because if you're a Vintage player, guess what? You already live in that world. Kind of.
Kind of. I mean, there is still Magic Online, which I guess is my next question of parameters. Are we also assuming digital platforms are turned off?
I guess maybe we had a slightly different idea about this. You seem to be wanting to like investigate a like pure hypothetical that could never happen. Like, just imagine,
Yes, that's what I want to
snap your
imagine.
fingers and the lights get turned off. I feel like it is a little more interesting to talk about also maybe what that slow decline may actually look like in reality, because, yeah, in a world where Magic is dying actively, I think Magic Online would be one of the things that would last a little longer, probably. There's not as much upkeep for that. I know they've already, offloaded the management of that to a separate contractor. So, I mean, maybe that means they just, fire that contractor immediately and that's just over. But, I think digital play could straggle on a little while longer. But for the purposes of this hypothetical, I guess let's assume no, there is no Magic Online anymore.
So no more Magic Online, no new cards,
No arena.
and definitely no, at least I assumed, no like new advertising. Like Wizards of the Coast is not out there trying
Correct.
to sell the game and get new players in. And also a big part of that is there's no cards on shelves in stores anymore. You know, maybe there's limited stock that game stores are going to hold on to, but Target, which was just going to carry, you know, big box stores that carry, here's a couple boosters of the latest set. Strangers to the game are not going to walk past and just pick up the game incidentally that way anymore.
Yeah, I think the lack of outreach and advertising is one of the things that matters the most for the purposes of this conversation. I think it's safe to assume if you're not making a new product, you have nothing to advertise. So that's just done.
So where do you want to start as far as what you think that this little thought experiment would happen? Like, do you think that Magic would continue and that the players that are really sort of involved and in love with this game would just keep playing it regardless? And do we actually not need any new cards? Or is that critical to the kind of ecosystem that we live in?
Let's start by setting some goalposts at the extremes, because I think one really extreme optimistic take is that it basically wouldn't affect our sense of Magic at all. Our, investment in Cube, which is already a format that Wizards of the Coast doesn't really care about. I mean, they run Magic Online cubes every once in a while, these cubes on Arena, but like cards are not designed for Cube. They make no money off of, Cube aside from the buy-ins to like, some online events. Wizards of the Coast, other than these, basically like 2 or 3 cubes, doesn't formally design cubes. They don't sell a Cube product, right? Like it is not a format that is like really affecting their bottom line at all. So the optimistic take is to say that like, yeah, we could keep recording this podcast for another 5 years and it wouldn't matter at all that they didn't make any new Magic product because we already aren't talking about the new Magic product. We've already kind of stopped doing set reviews entirely. And we have, endless stuff to dredge up about Cube design and about the game that doesn't require new product injections to make that make sense. Our Cube Playgroup could continue playing every single Tuesday at, actually, we did have to very recently move to a non-game store anymore. So we're now playing at a brewery instead of our local game store. So that would be not affected at all because presumably, obviously that brewery's not going anywhere. We're certainly not going anywhere because of this news that Wizards of the Coast is being, snapped out of existence. So we can keep playing Cube. We have 50-some cubes in the Playgroup. They don't cease to exist because the game is no longer being printed. And so we could just keep doing that. So there's an optimistic take that says that the part of the game that we care about most, Cube, could just carry on as normal, right? Maybe a couple channels in the Discord get a little less active. Obviously, there's no more spoiler discussion. And I think there's certain people maybe that are most invested in that social space as a means to talk about new spoilers. Maybe those people are no longer as invested. But the vast majority of people in the MTG Cube Talk Discord, I think, are not there to talk about spoilers. They're there to talk about Cube design. And so we can maybe set one theoretical goalpost and say, like, that is perhaps the most optimistic take, that, like, we could, in theory, be completely unaffected. And that is sort of the optimistic worldview that I was invoking with the Cube Will Outlive Magic idiom, the saying that made its way onto a playmat. It's just basically like, yeah, we don't actually care what you do with the game. You can change it all you want. You can ruin it as far as I'm concerned, and it doesn't affect my relationship to Cube, the thing that I actually love.
Do you think that's actually true, though? Do you think that's
Absolutely
what would happen?
Not.
Okay, great.
No, I don't think so at all. So let's talk about like the other extreme, maybe the extreme pessimistic view, which would be that without new Magic product, the vast majority of listeners of this podcast would just stop listening. They just don't care, and they're like no longer playing the game. I mean, maybe it's assumed most of our listeners are not playing Magic if they're not making new sets. They just quit. And they no longer are invested in the game. The people that are in the Discord just leave because they no longer are playing the game. Who cares anymore? We, despite having things we could talk about, because we can't, even our most pessimistic view, we still have things we could talk about in this podcast, but will we still make this podcast if 90% of our listeners just hung up and stopped playing the game anymore? That's a whole different conversation, which is kind of interesting to have. But, I think it would be a huge motivation not to if we didn't have as many people that were benefiting from all the time we put into making this show. And you could also argue that we have a pretty active Cube Play group. I think, humility aside, by many measures, the best Cube Play group, the biggest, most vivacious Cube Play group in the world is kind of...
Then why are we not Cube Person of the Year?
Is maybe here in Baltimore, which, like, for example, there are more people playing Cube in New York, but there's kind of a fractured scene up there because New York is so big. There's not really, like, one centralized place where everyone in all of New York City plays.
Wow, now we know what we're going to get hate about for this episode.
Look,
calling out the New York Play Group.
No, I mean, we have tons of friends in the New York Play Group. I love them. I'm just saying that there is not a place in New York where they're getting 35 people every single week playing Cube because they're kind of, a little bit fractured in different places. So by many respects, we are the play group that should, in theory, be able to best survive a hypothetical overnight shutdown of Wizards of the Coast. The most pessimistic take is that maybe a huge majority of the people in our playgroup would just stop playing Magic. Maybe, they come to Cube Night, a few times a month, but mostly they play Cube to play Commander with their friends and to play at a pre-release or, play on Arena or play Magic Online. Once Arena and Magic Online and those pre-releases no longer exist and their friends have quit playing Commander because the game is now dead, maybe they just stop playing Magic altogether and stop coming to Cube, and maybe our Cube playgroup dwindles to a shadow of its former self. So I think those are the kind of two extremes we can imagine in this hypothetical world where Wizards of the Coast is blinked out of existence.
And honestly, what I think would actually happen is, it's probably not either extreme, but I think it is much closer to the pessimistic side of that scale. I think there's kind of like two ways to look at, or two aspects of this group, this like play group, to think about the way it would change. Because one is that like people who are there, who are showing up every week, that are a consistent member of the group, just stop playing for complicated reasons. The other is that our group is kind of constantly evolving, and there are people that move on and like end up just, losing interest in Cube for a while, or they end up having a baby, or myriad reasons that people, or just, leave the city.
Or they get a new job and they can't come play Tuesday nights anymore.
Yeah.
And that was the one way they were still attached to Magic, and now they're just not anymore.
And yet we still have a consistent, 30 people showing up every week, but it's not necessarily the same 30 people.
It's certainly not the same 30 people it was 4 years ago.
Exactly.
And it's certainly not the same 30 people it was before the pandemic.
And so I think that the group of people that is like, hey, you're consistently coming every week, you're like a static member of the group and a static player.
Stable, let's say.
Stable player.
I don't think you're static. I think you're all changing all the time.
That's so true. I think that group will last quite a bit longer, like you're describing, like show up and just play the game for our enjoyment and have these cubes that are going to sit on our shelf and last forever. There's no reason for us to necessarily be directly influenced by that. But I think if we look at that population and look at the outward flow and inward flow, we're going to get a lot fewer new players, and just that natural decay means that I think that the playgroup is just going to shrink, and I think that we might be some of the players that stick around longest as far as all types of Magic players. And I think it might be interesting to think about what those different groups are. But I think that, even the Cube group will eventually die.
I struggle with that kind of stuff because, of course, it's all going to eventually die. Eventually, Magic will die. Eventually, the Cube group will cease to exist. Eventually, we'll all burn down or whatever. And, I don't say that just like purely within hyperbole. Like, I think it's inevitable that Magic will die in my lifetime. I mean, maybe I die young. If I live a normal life expectancy, I think it's inevitable Magic will die in my lifetime. I think it's obviously inevitable that our Cube group will also die within my lifetime. I don't expect these things to outlive me.
I think that Magic will live for exactly as, or what am I trying to say?
When you die, Magic dies? You're linked?
No. I think that, if you look at most phenomena, you are on average in the middle of them. So I think Magic will last about another 32 years. On average. That makes
Definitely
sense, right?
Definitely not an Anthony-centric worldview over there. I'm at the center of everything, it turns out, actually.
No. Just if you take a random sample of any time-bounded experience, on average, you're in the middle of it.
That's assuming that like the lifespan of that thing is like a bell curve in terms of investment, is it not?
I don't think so.
If the thing gets more and more and more and more popular until the day it dies, then a random sampling would have you much more close to the end of its life.
This is a whole other episode.
Yeah, we don't want to talk about that.
I promise there's an entire episode worth of discussion there.
I think your sort of explanation is very accurate, which is that there is a natural attrition rate to any playgroup just because life happens, right? People are not going to be around forever. People are going to come and go for whatever reasons they do. And the going is a thing that probably, in the case of our playgroup, would not actually have almost anything to do with Magic ceasing to exist. Most people that are invested in our playgroup are more or less like us and come to play Cube with us and probably would not care that much if there wasn't a new set coming out every 2 months for the rest of time and would just keep playing, which I don't think is true of other formats, right? Like, I do think that you could say the same thing theoretically about Commander. People could just keep playing their Commander decks for all time, but I don't think that format would have as much half-life as Cube, because I do think that it is much more contingent on sort of injections of new cards for excitement and injections of content related to Commander and videos about Commander and podcasts about Commander. Like, I think the excitement of that whole sort of scene has a shorter half-life than Cube does. But to your point, I think it is very easy for people to take for granted the reasons why new people are coming into a situation like that. As much as we are independent from Wizards of the Coast, from Magic the Gathering as a product, as much as we, try and just kind of do our own thing and ignore other stuff, we are absolutely benefiting from all of the energy and money and time that Wizards of the Coast is putting into making and advertising this game. There's no doubt that we are a little parasite, a little moray eel clung onto the side of Wizards of the Coast that, I mean, how many people that are extremely invested in cube design are disillusioned Commander players?
Let's say 98%.
Basically all of them, right? Like who gets into this game because of cube? Almost nobody, right? Like, it is so rare that this, maybe one of the most high investment, deepest ways to play the game would be your introduction. You and I are both sort of lapsed Commander players that, loved building decks for many years. And that's a story I've heard from so many other cube designers where it's like, I thought Commander was for me, but it turned out that I wanted a format to play these weird old cards that I liked, and I just couldn't find a good game because everybody was like a try-hard, sweaty min-maxer or whatever, and pub stomper. And so I made my way to cube eventually. So, like, it's naive to think that even though we're all here because we're all sort of refugees of other formats of Magic that we outgrew, that there is a world where you could just bring people into Cube without having the on-ramp of all of these sort of lower investment, easier to access formats that Wizards of the Coast makes.
Yeah, and also in a lot of ways just like more exciting, I guess. Is that fair to say? Like maybe a more clear narrative to get into Standard, like get a deck and you can play, and it's rewarding to go to FNM and improve. And Cube is just like kind of weird and esoteric, and you need a different, more subtle sales pitch than that.
I mean, even like you and I don't play digital Magic, but like I think our Cube Playgroup and Cube in general benefits so much from Arena. Like Arena is the best thing that Wizards of the Coast has done in the last 10 years for making the game more accessible and like getting new people invested, I think. Even though you and I never touch it and don't care about it at all and could not care less about what's legal on Arena or whatever, that has had, I think, had a profoundly positive impact on our playgroup. And I'm certain there are people that essentially learned how to play Magic on Arena and then made their way to the game store and then eventually made their way to our playgroup because they found their way there and then now they're invested in our format.
Definitely seen a lot of people that have followed that trajectory of, I started playing on Arena, went to a pre-release, and hey, this Cube thing seems kind of cool, but...
Yeah, at a pre-release, 2 of my 4 opponents were telling me to come out on Tuesdays because we have a bit of a stranglehold on our local scene.
Yeah, but I think that those are really important steps to that trajectory.
I think you and I are kind of in agreement about, like, the longevity of formats like Cube, which is to say that if you are highly invested and you have highly invested friends, yeah, you can go on for a long time. And I think if you and I continue to love Cube at the same intensity, like we could keep running Cube Night and, fast forward 5 years and maybe we have 8 to 15 people instead of 30 to 40 on the average Cube Night. That's like, I think a optimistic but kind of maybe possible take. I think some new people would still come in, but at a much, much, much lower rate than they are currently coming in.
For sure. And I would guess that the new people coming in are people that have taken a break from Magic. And they're like, oh yeah, I used to play that when I was a kid and I want to come back to it. I think we would have almost no one that is coming totally from scratch.
Yeah, probably. The only circumstances I can imagine are like, partners or really good friends of somebody who's extremely invested and willing to go through all of like the work to teach them the game and get them excited about it. But that's a ton of work. And like our community organizing, which we have been doing for years, does not extend to getting people invested like over that first hurdle and invested in the game, period. Like we benefit from, again, all of the infrastructure that exists to set that up to take advantage of that.
Do you think it's interesting to kind of talk about the different kinds of players and sort of who you think would fall off first? Because we're kind of talking just about how we are affected by this huge, massive whale shark of a group of players, but that does consist of many different kinds of people.
Yeah, for sure.
So I feel like the first group of people that's going to fall off is just like professional people and people who are playing on the Pro Tour, grinders that are just like really aspiring to get to the next event, get to Worlds, as well as content creators. I feel like both those groups just like, if you turn off the faucet, it's like so much of their motivation just disappears overnight.
Oh, good. We disagree completely on this. So we can actually have some agreement, some part where we don't agree completely. I don't think that's true at all. I think that's a kind of narrow way to view quote-unquote content creators and people that are like have competitive aspirations. I don't think those people were like looking at the world and said, oh, where is the thing I can go and try and be the best at? Or like, where is the thing I can make YouTube videos about to like, make a small channel, make some money? I think those people fundamentally love Magic very, very, very deeply. And that is how they became a competitively invested player. Or they became somebody invested enough to start making podcasts or videos about it. To me, that comment is kind of like the people that comment on our videos, like, you don't love Magic at all. And it's like, yes, I do, dummy. I'm here making all this stuff about it. I think their relationship with the game would change perhaps most dramatically, but I think those are some of the most invested people. And even though they are not invested in ways right now that are sustainable in the absence of the fire hose of new stuff, I think those are probably among the most likely people to find a new way to relate to the game that I think they probably love very deeply.
That's interesting. I mean, I definitely see where you're coming from, but I can just so easily see, I'm thinking about like limited podcasts that I've listened to a lot in the past. My expectation is not that they would say, let me find a new way to engage in this game. I think they would say, let me go find a new game. Because a lot of players do play multiple games, and they'll, whether it's video games or another trading card game, and I think that there are just a lot more options that we don't necessarily see that much, but Lorcana is out there, and I think, who knows, maybe that's dead already anyway, because we don't pay too much
Quick,
attention.
name a card game. The name a card game challenge for Anthony.
Yu-Gi-Oh!, Flesh and Blood, all these things. And I think
Hearthstone, Sorcery, others.
I think there are just
Pokemon,
so many options that are constantly sort of scrabbling for people's attention that I think that people will find an opportunity. It's like, especially somebody who, let's say they're a writer and they're used to writing articles about Magic. If that's just not really an option, do you think people will keep writing about Magic?
Mostly, no. I mean, the vast majority of writing about Magic, it happens because someone pays someone to do it. And
Right.
that money's going to dry up very, very quickly in a world where, I mean, we're going to talk a little bit more. I have a lot of thoughts about just like how the landscape of the game would change, but it's safe to say like that money is going to drop immediately. And yeah, so the number of new articles about Magic is going to die off precipitously.
So maybe we disagree on that a little bit, but for me, I feel like those two groups of people are going to be some of the first to drop off.
Real quick, just to clarify, I don't think that like limited podcasts are a great example. I don't think that, Limited Resources or Lords of Limited is going to like, let's keep doing a podcast, but like change completely what we're doing. But I do think Ethan and Ben are still going to play Magic.
Okay, no, I think that is an important distinction because, like, yes, I agree with you that many of those people are some of the most invested and passionate about Magic, so sure, they'll stick around. But it's also going to be a complete change in landscape because when there stop being a bunch of podcasts and content being created about stuff, that's just going to take a lot of energy out of the room. That's so many people who were... I'm engaged, but I'm engaged in a way that I kind of need that injection of, I listen to this weekly limited podcast, and that's what keeps me excited about going to FNM. And without that little bit of pressure, I think a lot of people are going to start declining and dropping off.
There's going to be a big drop off for sure. I just think the first people to go are the people that you don't even, like the invisible people that came out to a couple Cube nights or, in the broader sense, like, bought a couple packs at Target and then forgot about the game and would not think about it again, except in 3 months they walk by a new display at Target and they see a cool looking art and think, oh yeah, I have a couple of those packs at home, I'll buy some more. Like, those people who wouldn't even make a conscious choice to stop playing Magic probably wouldn't even hear the news that it stopped existing. They would just no longer, happen upon one of the many platforms in which Wizards of the Coast is trying to advertise the new game. And so they essentially were like already gone. That to me is the first group that like has no chance of coming back.
That's really interesting because I could see this both ways. These like kitchen table players that are sort of engaged just a little bit. On one hand, like you're saying, they are kind of not super engaged, which means they could just keep that, here I have my 2 starter decks and every couple months we pull them out and I play a game with, my brother or my friend. They could keep engaging in a light way, and we don't really know the way that they engage. But I think I do agree with you that Magic is a complicated enough game that I think it does take some small external pushes, like walking past some booster packs at the store, to kind of remind people and keep people engaged. So I think I agree with you that a lot of those people will drop off quickly as well.
Yeah, I feel a little bad bringing this up just because he's not here to say his perspective too. In talking in the Discord with Bones about this, Bones was very much of the opinion like, yeah, people buy, some starter decks and then they can play them forever. It's just like having Monopoly or chess in your house. Like, it's just a game you have for all time. And I just don't think anyone relates to the game in that way, right? For those people, like, you don't have to wait for Magic to die. You could say, how many people do you think are out there right now that, bought starter decks from Kaladesh and don't even know what's happened to Magic since, but still occasionally break out there like Kaladesh starter packs and play them against each other? I just don't think that's happening. I think it's the kind of game that, unlike Monopoly or chess, requires a huge sort of hurdle to get over to get into the game. And I think the natural byproduct of like, once you get over that hurdle, I think it is so easy to just kind of fall into the game and become quite invested because you've made it over that really steep hill. And then it's so rewarding once you're over that sort of peak of the hill to just sort of start getting invested in the game in a more deep way. Versus, I think most people just kind of bounce off that, front hurdle, or they get over it for one night and they're like, the juice wasn't worth the squeeze to me. And gosh, this game's quite complicated and like really difficult. For those reasons, yeah, I just don't think there are people that are not invested that are still whipping out some product from 5-10 years ago and just playing 3 times a year, right? I just don't think that's happening. I have no data on that. That's just my speculation.
I was going to say, did we mention the major caveat of this is all wild speculation?
No, you told me to stop doing caveats. Okay, I had them all written down. That was one of them.
Okay, great. We got to it anyway. Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting question is there are games that are like chess that, nobody's advertising chess. That would be a very funny thing to see. There's not like a new chess piece coming out every couple months.
People are advertising chess.
Oh, are they?
Yeah, there's whole websites that you pay a subscription service to play chess against people that advertise their services. There are apps that are designed for chess that you pay for that are being advertised.
Of course that would be the case. But still, chess feels different from Magic. And what is the difference? They're like a game that is just static can... Like, that definitely fits the role of, like, oh, family's in town for Christmas. Like, let's bust out this game and play it every once in a while. It doesn't require that, like, injection of new stuff.
Yeah, when's the last time we saw new DLC for chess? It's been so long since they put out some new stuff, some new texture packs.
So what is the difference there? I agree that there is a difference, and, like, we see people just, like, bust out board games and play them repeatedly, and they don't necessarily need that whole, like, lifestyle mode. Why does Magic not function the same way?
I mean, the difference is that chess has, 7 game pieces? 6 or 7 unique game pieces? And you can learn the rules in about 30 seconds, basically, save for a few edge cases. And Magic has 35,000 game pieces, and you can play for your entire life and still not know the rules in many circumstances and have to look them up or ask a judge. I think it's just like Magic is hugely complicated. And we, I think, lose that perspective a lot because it's great. And how great it is allows us to sort of forget about how complicated it is. And we're also among the most invested players, and so it's easy to forget how complicated it is. But yeah, I mean, trying to teach new players the game, you immediately become aware of like, oh yeah, there's a long tail of stuff that I just, take for granted and don't realize has to be explained. The example I always think about is Summoning Sickness, which is not written on any Magic card ever, save for a few cards that have haste reminder text and where it's, mentioned or whatever. This thing is completely unintuitive, I think, to new players. They're like, what do you mean? I just played it. Why can't I do anything with it? And it isn't mentioned on any card ever. You just have to know the rules or have been taught by somebody to know that Summoning Sickness is a thing. It is not even remotely intuitive.
I mean, that's a great example because I think Summoning Sickness was not even, it wasn't part of the rules. That terminology specifically.
Yeah, I don't think it's called that.
Cannot attack that turn. And I think maybe they changed that so that in reminder text they now use that phrase. But yeah, not even having a clear way to talk about major components of the game is kind of wild.
And it's so not resonant too. Like the name is as close to resonant as you can get. And it's like, well, you just summoned him, so he's kind of woozy.
He's not ready.
He can't do anything yet. You're like, what do you mean? I just summoned a huge demon.
I just got here.
A huge.
Give me a second.
Demon god, but he's out of sorts for a second and needs to gather his bearings.
No, I like this actually. This is good.
And there's obviously lots of great game design reasons why Summoning Sickness makes a ton of sense.
Very important.
But it's a great example of every time I have to explain Summoning Sickness, I'm like, holy crap, I always forget how deep and complicated this game is, right? And then you also have to explain, no, you can't attack that creature. You just attack me. I get to decide how I block. And you also have to explain why untapping is a thing and what tapping even is and what it represents. These things are complex. And so really, I do think it's just that. I think Magic is a much more complex game. And it's also the kind of game that I think one of the great advantages of Magic is the allowance for self-expression, which this is a great example of I'm sure there's opportunities for self-expression in chess too. Don't at me. But baked into...
Get that new texture pack.
Baked into the game mechanically, the fact that you can show up with your deck to any format or show up to limited and draft a deck that conforms to what your expectations of what cards you think are good. These sort of opportunities for self-expression in Magic are a huge part of what makes it great. And you can't do that without being somewhat invested, right? The self-expression really only comes when you're getting your own cards or learning how to, identify, what different draft archetypes look like and which ones you might prefer to play more, which probably means you have to play a couple of them to get a sense of what you like and don't like, right? So I think a lot of what makes Magic great, you don't feel the first time you play or the second time you play or the third time you play. You feel the fifth and seventh and 10th time you play, and then you get really sort of into it. But it's just too much and too deep to get anything really out of it if you just played it 3 times a year. Magic's a great game. I don't think it'd be a good game to play 3 times a year.
I wonder if there's also just a big sort of cultural expectation difference as well, which is, I think, related. But, Wizards has invested a lot in making sure that the way that their product is appreciated and contextualized is as this kind of lifestyle. You are not just a person that has your Monopoly box in the game cupboard that you can bring out and play with friends every once in a while. It is... You are a Magic player, and I think that is very effective in some ways at keeping people invested in the game and really, really connecting with their identity in a way that they will spend thousands and thousands of dollars on. I think that the flip side of that is that people are not willing to necessarily say in the same way, oh, sure, I've heard of Monopoly, I can figure out the rules. Instead, it's oh no, I'm not a Magic player. Therefore, until I am willing to put in the effort to make that change. The change in learning the game, but also that sort of change in my whole identity to what kind of a person am I? Will I be willing to just sit down and play every once in a while?
Chess is the rare example of a game that I think is both fairly accessible and also really, really deep. Like, you can obviously spend your entire lifetime becoming good at chess and like learning more about it, and people do that. There's not a ton of games that are super easy to learn that people do that for, right? Is there probably some weird group of people out there that are like playing Monopoly? They're playing Monopoly competitively. I'm sure they exist, but like, it is not
gonna r/competitive Monopoly. This is gonna be a nightmare.
Yeah, or like, take any other like popular, mainstream game you can like take off the shelf and play. Like, the games that are really good on both levels are extraordinary and exemplary, and the exceptions, not the rule. I think Magic trades a lot of depth and replayability and sort of reward for commitment for having a much bigger barrier to entry for new players, which is a trade I'm happy for it to make. That's fine. As an invested player, I think it's like a reasonable thing for it to do. But to talk about in this world where like Magic no longer is being made, and there's no longer pre-releases, and there's no longer Arena, and there's no longer starter product that's being made that are like getting people over that hump, I think the idea of taking a new friend that you made from you don't know what Magic is to I want you to draft Cube with me on Tuesdays, that's a hero's journey right there. That's an epic trip.
Yeah, I mean, and this also all just points to the fact that, like, Magic is a multifaceted experience, and I think that if you take out any of those facets, you start losing a lot of feedback loops that keep people engaged in the game. I mean, let's say 5 years ago when I was much more engaged, I was playing a bunch of Limited. I was really enjoying then taking all those cards that I opened and adding them to my collection and then remixing them into my own Commander decks and then listening to podcasts, and I could probably think of 3 other angles, and all of those things kind of fed on each other and really, really kept me engaged. But if you took any one of those elements out, say, take out the podcast, you can't listen to those anymore, take out the collecting aspect, any one piece, and the whole thing kind of starts to recede a little bit. Like, it depends on that interconnectedness to maintain that volume. So I think for many people that are kind of on the fence in the way that they are engaged, or they are just kind of maintaining a stable engagement, it doesn't take a lot, and obviously we're talking about a very, very big change to the game for them to drop out of it.
Can we start talking about the logistical stuff? Because I think that's actually a much bigger factor maybe than a lot of these like softer social factors.
Okay, so when you say logistics, do you just mean like there are a finite number of cards in the world now, and it is no longer going
Not quite.
up?
When I say logistics, I mean, how popular do you think Cube would be as a format if Cube Cobra didn't exist and people were managing their lists in spreadsheets?
It's a lot harder.
Or if Scryfall didn't exist and people had to use, whatever other alternatives there are that are nowhere near as well supported and don't have bots for Discord.
Gatherer.
Gatherer's not going to exist either. So, what happens when you can't just go on TCG Player and buy literally whatever card you want? Like, I think we take for granted that we can have any individual card in all of Magic's history we want for a price, right? All that infrastructure, that is going to suffer pretty quickly in a world where there is no longer this huge injection of capital at the top that is just going to trickle down through all of these other sort of layers. Which is not to say that like Gwen Decker's getting paid by Big Watsy or whatever, but Gwen Decker's paid by a Patreon of people that are invested in Cube, and again, Magic goes away, some number of those people are going to go away. They're going to stop paying the Patreon thing for Gwen, and they're going to stop paying Patreon to Scryfall, and there's no longer going to be the sort of entire ecosystem that relies on Scryfall that sort of justifies its existence, and these tools will just stop being a thing. Like, I think in a world where Wizards of the Coast no longer exists and Magic is no longer being made, I think it's a ticking time bomb before we don't have a cube management tool. We don't have a reliable database of cards that you can then, actively see. And the one caveat there is that, you could export it because it's not going to change anymore. So you've got that going for you. But all of the work that goes into maintaining Scryfall servers, maintaining their bots, maintaining everything, who knows where that goes. And not that long before you don't have a marketplace where you can just go and buy whatever you want. And honestly, people that live in Europe or, Southeast Asia already don't have that, right? Like, I think we take for granted in the United States that, like, we can just have whatever we want. But I know from talking to European players sometimes that, like, yeah, I think it's MKM is like Magic Card Market is like the equivalent kind of in Europe. And like, even they just more likely are out of stock of a thing. Like, nobody has the thing you want. And if you're in Japan, you got to use like Harayuya or whatever. And if they just don't have it, I don't know, maybe it's just a lot harder to find an individual card. I think all that stuff is going to make cube design a much higher friction hobby. And I think a lot of people would like to tell themselves that they wouldn't mind. They would switch to spreadsheets and they would, only use cards they could get access to, and they, wouldn't worry about these things. But I think realistically, that would have a huge impact on the number of people that are actually willing to stick with this hobby. Like, all that infrastructure that exists to like grease the wheels of this hobby is critically important to making it an enjoyable thing for people to do.
I mean, I can even share an anecdote from my own experience of, at some point I thought about making a jumpstart cube, and it was just a little bit too much friction. It was just a little too hard to make Cube Cobra work to make it make sense, and a spreadsheet was kind of awkward, and I was like, you know what? If there was the infrastructure for this to be easy, I would absolutely be doing this and spending a lot of effort, but I can't figure it out. So, yeah, I think that is absolutely true, and I think we should not understate how important all those tools are, and that they are not something we should necessarily take for granted.
For sure. And this, is a part of my broader worldview too, is just I'm such a believer in the fact that people don't wake up and do, whatever they want based on the whims of their heart and soul. People are a complete reflection.
Do you know what I did this morning?
People are a reflection of their context and surroundings. And I firmly believe that if you design a highway a little differently, you just can have a zillion more highway accidents. And it's not because all of a sudden people are just driving more recklessly. It's because you put the exact same people with the exact same risk-benefit analysis and the exact same sort of brains in a different context, and all of a sudden the outcome's completely different. I think you change the tools, you change the landscape of what it looks like to design a cube to, if you no longer draft a cube online, how much do people like me and Ollie, who do tons of playtest drafting of our cubes, how much does that just completely sap a lot of the fun out of it for us? And now the only time I can ever draft 3 packs of my cube is when I get a bunch of people together. Yeah, I'm just a firm believer that people underestimate how much their behavior would change based on a environmental change to their circumstances, because they want to think that they are not, merely responding to stimuli and, doing things based off of what's happening to them. They like to think that they're doing things based off their own free will. But in the aggregate, we're not. We're doing things based off of our circumstances and surroundings.
Absolutely. Counterpoint, since we're just doing this thought experiment, what if, instead of all that happening, Scryfall, which spends so much of their time and effort just trying to keep up with all the crazy new cards Wizards is printing, what if they're all of a sudden just oh, our whole thing just got so easy, now we can actually just focus on making things great? And maybe it's not obvious why there's a reason for them to do that, but what if tons of Magic players now kind of notice that Cube is kind of the best way to keep playing because there aren't new limited sets, but I want to be able to keep drafting and keep drafting things that are fresh, and everybody just gravitates to Cube. And in fact, Gwen needs a huge rethinking of things because the number of people trying to use Cube Cobra has tripled overnight because everybody is flocking to Cube as the one bastion of the best way to play Magic. And what if actually the collector's market explodes, which is a whole other question that I think that part might be true. And TCG Player not only continues to survive, but thrives because Magic has become such an important collectible market.
I mean, it's good to lay out all those alternatives. And again, the reality, I think, is somewhere in between. I do think, for example, we can take the Scryfall example, purely hypothetical, purely sort of speculating here, but I think if Wizards of the Coast was blinked out of existence tomorrow, that team would probably figure out, okay, what is the way that we can the most sustainably, with regards to our ongoing costs and maintenance of a website and a server, what is the way that we can archive this sort of database of all of Magic and try and ensure that it is available for the rest of time or for the foreseeable future. I do think they would make an effort to do that, and they probably succeed in some regards, right? Those other things you said could also theoretically happen, right? I don't think TCG Player is going to go anywhere because it doesn't sell just Magic cards, but I do think that, the stock of all of the available Magic cards is a product of all the local game stores and all the independent sellers across the country that are all listing their cards. They don't have one warehouse with all the stuff in it, right? And so I think a lot of those places are going to individually go out of business or individually stop being invested in Magic, unless, like you said, the collector's market just immediately becomes a thing. But now we're in the realm of pure and also completely pointless speculation as to what would actually happen to the Magic as a collector's market in some impossible future where Magic the Gathering does not slowly die and slowly become worse and worse and worse and get, just bleed players over years, but instead just, while it's at kind of the peak of its success, is no longer printed for whatever reason. Those things are all possibilities, and it's definitely worth acknowledging. Yeah,
and I wouldn't be surprised if the idea of more people flocking to Cube in the very short term was a thing.
I was just going to say.
But I think that broadly speaking, again, that decline would happen eventually, even if there was some shifts in the way that people are engaging with the game in the meantime.
If you imagine that we kept 80% of all the Cube players, and we also, of all the Commander players, 60% quit the game, and 30%, went and played other formats and pre-modern or whatever, and 10% came to Cube. If we get 10% of all the Commander players coming to Cube, that would triple the size of the Cube community overnight, probably.
Probably more than that.
So yeah, I do imagine that you're right, in the short term we could do that, but in that future, even in the most optimistic version, I don't think in 10 years Cube Cobra is growing. I think it's a big injection right away, and then the slow death begins of the churn of life, right? Some number of those Cube designers that came over just get a new hobby, just, move on. They have a kid, they, move to a new chapter of their life or whatever. They die. They're old and they die. Those things will just happen, and I don't think in a broader sense you're getting new people into the game at almost any rate.
Yeah, and I think the idea of the collector's market continuing to sort of support the infrastructure that we need to be able to acquire cards, I think that is definitely not true. I do think the collector's market would be insane, but it would be focused on a small subset of cards. And when I want some, random common from 10 sets ago,
good luck.
For a cube, it's not really going to be feasible.
Yeah, I don't care to speculate about the market side of things. I have thoughts, but I don't care. It's so gross.
I watched a couple episodes of this, a Netflix series about people that are into collecting, and it was just grotesque, appalling. I hate it so much.
And you thought we weren't going to say controversial things on our podcast.
It really made me feel kind of gross about how much collecting I have done in Magic the Gathering in the past.
You don't know this because you don't read all the comments on the show, which is good. You probably shouldn't. People got mad specifically at me on our year-end show because we were talking about Magic as a collectible game, and I was telling the anecdote about how I saw this person who didn't even really know that Magic was a thing, but was talking about the Final Fantasy card game and would just like to crack packs and open stuff. And a lot of people were hurt that I said it was fucking stupid to do that, to just open packs for no reason.
Yeah.
Here's what I'll say. I'm sorry you were hurt. My intention was not to hurt you. I do think it's fucking stupid. And I do fucking stupid things too. I'm not above it. We all do
You've been
stupid
playing
things.
with a knife this whole recording.
I've just been opening and closing a knife this whole recording. And the fact that I even bought this knife is fucking stupid. It's like some cool knife that and I got tricked by a bunch of YouTube videos I watched because I whatever. Look, I do stupid shit too. We all do stupid shit. I think you should be honest with yourself and recognize that opening cards for no reason other than to have cards and look at them is stupid. It's dumb. It's fucking stupid.
There are things I own just because I like to look at them.
Yeah, if it brings you joy, that you can do stupid things because they bring you joy, but it's still stupid. I'm sorry to say that again. And remember, you can call Anthony if you have any problems with this episode on his personal cell phone number.
Oh, God.
Yeah, collecting is a thing that I have in my bones to some degree. My brain chemistry wants to collect things. And I also have to have this constant back and forth dialogue about how it is very dumb to collect things for the sake of collecting. And you need to have some broader reason to do it. And for me, for Magic, I like having my Magic collection. And the reason that I can justify it is because I not only get to play with my collection, I get to actually bring them out and do something vaguely functional with them. That is the reason they exist. But I also get to share it with people. I literally get to go and take a chunk of my collection in the form of a cube to a place and people get to open it. I get to hear people say oh, this version of this card is so cool. I've never seen this printed before. This art is so sick. I get to build a social world around my collection, which is the reason why I'm able to justify this particular stupid thing I do. But yeah, collecting more broadly, I think is honestly a kind of beautiful part of human nature that I think has been tragically exploited and capitalized on by all of our incentive structures, right? It's kind of sweet and beautiful that people like to collect and treasure things and appreciate details of things a lot of other people might overlook. And the fact that so many industries have basically turned that base, human drive into just a profit center for some product is disgusting.
Anyway, yeah, call me if you're mad, I guess.
Call Anthony if you're mad about that. So should we recap? Here's what I actually think will happen. I think Magic's going to die a slow death. I think it's going to be...
Okay, so we're stepping out of the thought experiment now. What is the real future of Magic, is what you're saying.
I want to step out of here's the most pessimistic and the most optimistic. I want to call my shot right now. I'll what I think the actual death of Magic might look like and what it would mean for us as a Cube community. And you can maybe take that and also translate it to your pre-modern communities or your, whatever you like to do in Magic. But, basically, I think that if and when Magic dies, it will be a slow death where the game changes in a big way from what it was into a different version of itself. And in that transition, we'll lose a lot of the maybe most invested players, people who have been invested in the game for a long time, and maybe pick up some new players that have different values or whatever. It will be a slow loss of identity and loss of what the game means to people. It's a big enough IP that I don't realistically think they are going to stop printing Magic cards almost ever. But I think at some point, the quality of the product will start to decrease because for whatever reason. I'm not even speculating as to why. Like maybe it's because they are required to print way more sets a year than they were before, and it's impossible to maintain quality control at that scale. Or maybe it's because they're forced by Hasbro's overlords to do crossovers with IPs that make absolutely no sense for Wizards of the Coast and for Magic the Gathering, and so the cards are clearly like huge compromises because they don't actually make any sense. Whatever reason, the quality of the product starts to decrease. Hasbro sees this and budgets decrease, and there's layoffs because Magic is struggling, and with those layoffs there are now fewer people around to help make the game great, and so future sets suffer even more, and eventually it'll probably just reach this point where essentially it becomes like IP, right? In the most shallow sense. And Hasbro owns the mana symbols, owns the name Magic the Gathering, owns the idea of planeswalkers, owns these sort of, concepts, and basically puts it into like free fall, does whatever they can to like make the most profit margin with this IP they own once they've given up on like continuing to like 10x this product, every 2 years. I think realistically that would mean at some point that Hasbro would effectively go out of business and the IP would be bought by some other company that maybe has something else going for it. Like if you've looked at Hasbro's returns and like, quarterly tax reports to their investors over the past few years, it's like you are just Wizards of the Coast, the company, right? Like every other section of the company is either barely treading water or, losing, millions and millions of dollars every quarter. And Wizards of the Coast is like your cash cow. It's your golden goose. And you keep coming back to it for a full case of golden eggs every quarter because you have to. At some point when that dries up, I think it's probably the end of Hasbro, and they'll go into bankruptcy, and the IPs will be bought by various people in a classic, corporate restructuring, and there'll be a whole bunch of like garbage bullshit that will happen. I think in that world, maybe we see Magic's IP owned by somebody else, but it's going to be owned by whoever thinks they can capitalize off of it the most. It's not going to be a cheap IP, even when Hasbro is, underwater and failing, and it will just be this kind of slow bleed of fewer players are invested in the game, less sales of product, and everything just sort of kind of peters out. And it would take a really long time before there would be no money to be made from this product. And so I think it'd be a really long time before there wouldn't be any new stuff coming out. In some ways, to me, it's like the most bleak version, right? And it's why you hear people say now that like, oh, if you went back in time 10, 15 years and you said, what if I told you in 2026, Magic the Gathering will be putting out 7 sets into Standard, and 4 of them would be from IPs that are not Magic the Gathering. It's like the Star Trek set and the Marvel set and the whatever. You would realistically think, if you went back 10 or 15 years, like, that sounds desperate as hell. That sounds like they were grasping at anything to try and keep this game afloat and keep it relevant. Like, why would you sacrifice the integrity that much? And the sort of narrative we're living in is not that like Wizards of the Coast like sacrifices integrity, but it like sees this opportunity to like grow the game tremendously, theoretically for the benefit of all of us, right? There's supposed to be a bunch of new players in the game now because of the broad appeal of Final Fantasy and Spider-Man and Marvel or whatever. But I think there's another narrative which is basically just like, this is the desperate starting to die throes of a company that found that its core product was not meeting the sort of expectations of their corporate owners. So anyway, slow death. Slow death, and I think that our Cube Playgroup would shrink pretty quickly, but I do think we could maintain enough people that are, worth invested in playing this format that we could keep playing Cube for, I would bet, a couple years. I bet a couple years we'd still go. And then as soon as I honestly think you and or our sort of time came in the sort of, circle of life where something changed about our lives and we just like didn't have room for this anymore, like a new season of life comes, that would, I think, be difficult for the Playgroup to survive in a world where Magic doesn't exist. I think right now, if you and I just checked out, and we keep going because there's also Magic to support it, but once Magic is no longer being made, then our Cube Playgroup is entirely reliant on the extreme investment and dedication of central figures. And yeah, I think it'd be a couple years maybe, and then we probably wouldn't be doing it anymore. And honestly, I don't think this podcast would last super long, to be perfectly frank. I think we would lose a bunch of listeners pretty quickly as Magic starts to die. Kind of feels funny to say, right? Because we certainly don't do this podcast for the money. It took us forever to like get over the sort of hangups around monetizing it, quote unquote, to like start a Patreon to pay an editor. We started this show, we were making it for, dozens or hundreds of people every week. There was like almost nobody listening, and we were still excited to make it. But I do think there is a sort of hard to quantify level to which the energy would just leave the room, right? And I think there would be a lot less excitement around this sort of remixing and hacking of Magic's culture without the sort of central figure. Unless we were able to sort of parlay this into something different.
Yu-Gi-Oh!
Well, no, I think the example of Netrunner is what is important to talk about here. I know people are enthusiastic players of Netrunner. This was another game designed by Richard Garfield, like 2 years after Magic, that Wizards of the Coast owned for a long time, but they never did as well as Magic, so they made a set or two or whatever, and then stopped making it. And then, like, a decade later, some company came and bought the IP from Wizards of the Coast and said, can we buy this from you? You haven't done anything with it in, 15 years. Can we buy the name and the sort of mechanics and whatever sort of IP that's associated with it so that we can make this product? And Wizards of the Coast said yes, sold it to them, and they sort of brought it back and made it somewhat popular enough to run a company off of. But then there was a licensing issue, and Wizards of the Coast wouldn't give them the license anymore because they were apparently just leasing it or something instead of buying it. So then that company went out of business and it stopped being made again. But then a few years later, a nonprofit came along that was organized by a bunch of Netrunner players, just people that were really invested in the game and loved it, fans, that managed to convince Wizards of the Coast to sell them the IP formally and permanently. And now the game is effectively kind of open source in a sense. You can download any Netrunner, anything, just on the website, print it out, play it. There's a bunch of free websites where you can just go and play Netrunner either against AIs or against other people. And it's all community made, essentially, right? There's not a centralized financial incentive to organize this game. And it's worth noting, it's not very popular. I did some looking around and tried to find some of the biggest Netrunner YouTube channels or whatever, and it's not it's the kind of community that can support anywhere near the size of what Magic supports right now. But it does exist, and there is a world, I think, maybe where, obviously we couldn't do what they did. We wouldn't be able to afford to buy Magic's IP, but maybe there's a world where we can tweak and change what this podcast is about to more formally sort of acknowledge the nature of the punk format of Cube and figure out a way to formalize it such that it's not just a dying moray eel on the whale shark of Wizards of the Coast, but it is now a vibrant life form unto itself.
Yeah, that's an optimistic vision. I mean, I think that if we were living in a world where there were just no new cards being printed, I think the idea of trying to cultivate a community around building custom sets and totally custom cards could be pretty interesting. And I could definitely see a future where, we're talking about the infrastructure that would die. That would also take very specific infrastructure. But if there are enough really dedicated people that are willing to put in that energy when that energy is no longer there in the background radiation, I could see something like that happening in a future for Cube that is very different. But that's where I feel very pessimistic because, this whole conversation, we've still been talking about playing Magic with official cards that were produced by Wizards of the Coast, and that kind of open source, owned by the community type of experience can't really exist if Wizards of the Coast is still there in every legal sense, but not there in a way that is interested in supporting that type of community. Mark Rosewater could retire, and they could just choose, we're shutting it down.
Absolutely not. Under no circumstances would that ever happen.
Oh, can you imagine the look on Gavin's face when they told him?
Wait, what if Mark Rosewater, when he first signed his contract in 1997, he had a special clause that said, you can just kill this thing whenever you want. You've got your finger on the button. I like to fantasize about an alternate history sometimes where, I'm a socialist, I'm a leftist, and I think a lot of capitalist apologists would say something like, well, all the stuff you love only exists because of capitalism. Nobody would have ever made Magic the Gathering if not for the incentive of making a fat pile of money off of all the things that Magic the Gathering offers. And same is true for everything in your life, right? The computer you're recording this podcast on or whatever, that is sort of the apologia I hear a lot from people that, believe that free market capitalism is the only way to make good stuff.
Yeah, everything exists around me because of capitalism, because it wasn't given a chance to exist in a different way. We only live in one world.
Yes, there's that. But I like to sort of fantasize about an alternate reality where I genuinely think, if you could, rewrite history, that if the people that ran Wizards of the Coast did not care about making as much money as possible, just cared about being stable, making enough money to continue to keep the lights on or whatever, that there is a world where Magic could effectively be open source, right? If Wizards of the Coast designed the cards, had a whole R&D team that was still making new sets, but let's say at a more sustainable pace instead of the breakneck pace we see today, and just said look, we're going to embrace the fact that you can just print cards out. That's how this works. Here's a file you can download where the cards are actually optimized for printing on a black and white laser printer so they don't look like garbage or whatever. And we're also going to sell our own printed cards. We're also going to invest in infrastructure so that like we can print better cards than like, you know, the whatever makeplayingcards.coms of the world. If you want to do that, great, download the files and go print them out. But we're going to try and actually also just make a product that is better than you can get for buying the cards directly, and also is cheaper because we have the whole infrastructure. We like own the entire thing, right? You look at like secret layers and it's like, all right, well, the secret layer, what you're paying for is this like inflated idea of value, but like that's also just Wizards saying like, yeah, we made a really cool version of a card that like is actually really hard for somebody else to like replicate. And I do think there's probably been a lot of conversations behind the scenes of Wizards of the Coast about like all these crazy treatments we're seeing, I'm sure is largely a response to, well, you can go on makeplayingcards.com and get a regular version of something, or you can get a like bare bones foil version of something, but you can't get this crazy treatment. And so like that's why we're going to do Kaladesh Inventions and, you know, all these other booster fun things, because it is like actually unique in the marketplace, right? They can still do all of that, and I would gladly pay for it. And most people that saw the game at Target would have no idea that they could go online and download the cards. Like, you have to get so invested before you get to the point that you know you're even allowed to do that, that like I can imagine a world where then you also just have people that like, I would pay a subscription service to just support, like I would essentially back the Wizards of the Coast Patreon effectively, right? Not that they would use that actual service, but like if there was a way I could just support a game that was actually designed and built to match my values to some degree, like I would happily do it. And I think tons of other players would. It's just, we would never get to that alternate world in our current incentive structure. But I think that like could be a stable way for the game to exist. And it's kind of what Netrunner is demonstrating is possible, right? Like my understanding is that that's how Netrunner works, and it is stable, and people like the game and they really enjoy it, and they're designing new sets for it, right? Like that shows that it is possible. It's just a shame that I don't want to learn a new card game. I have no desire to learn a new card game.
It's funny also, on the What is Netrunner page, it's an asymmetric card game set in a dystopian future where 4 mega corporations control almost every aspect of daily life.
Yeah.
Really makes
what
you,
a dystopian
really makes
future.
You think.
Makes you think you just got to do something. Somebody ought to do something. Any final thoughts, Anthony?
No, I think it is worth having the little bit of humility that no, Cube probably will not outlive Magic, but I don't think that means we shouldn't try.
Classic pedantic answer of, will Cube outlive Magic? How do you define Cube? How do you define outlive? And how do you define Magic?
Yeah, it really depends on what your definition of is.
I feel very strongly that at some day, Wizards of the Coast will cease to exist, and at some day after that, somebody will draft a Cube. And so in that sense, I'm very confident Cube will outlive Magic.
I appreciate that optimistic take.
And on that bombshell, that's the end of this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. Thank you all for tuning in. If you want to send... Oh, wait.
Oh.
It's a little late.
Got some skibbity toilets there, frantically digging through the pile of cards, hats, documents, cubes.
Okay, I'm going to open this one because it's addressed to me, but I think it's for the show. From listener Cade Goforth. Perhaps you've heard of him. Wouldn't it be funny if I spent the entire time opening and closing this knife and then I just open it with my fingers after all of that?
Or just, cut yourself horribly.
Okay. To our P.O. Box 4855, Baltimore, Maryland, 21211. We have, and on that bombshell, the thing I just said is printed on this card that I just opened from Cade Goforth. This is a note that is definitely to me and not to be read on air. Thank you, Cade, for the note. And also the foil Odyssey Barbarian Ring.
Incredible. You know it's going right into a cube.
I'm obsessed. It's one of my favorite cards of all time. Thank you so much, Cade. I will read this fully and respond on my own time. Sorry if you didn't want that opened on air. We didn't say anything about it other than we opened it and it had a card in it. Anyway, you can be like Cade by sending us something to our P.O. Box, the address of which I already said. You can find the show on Patreon where we raise some money to both pay our editor and also pay to send people to local Cube events. You can find that list of local Cube events on our website. There is a community page with a list of all the local Cube events we are aware of, and I think it's all of them. If there's one I'm not aware of, definitely send me a message or write me an email to let me know.
Or just call me. You've got my phone.
Or just call Anthony's personal cell phone. All the music for this show is produced by DJ James Nasty, and the show is edited by Matthew. All the Magic cards are produced by Wizards of the Coast. If we got any of the rules text for any of those cards wrong, that was intentional to bait you for engagement. Anthony, thank you for the gift of friendship and for the gift of Cube.
Thank you for the gift of wild speculation.
It's so fun to wildly speculate. It is very funny that I said it on that bombshell, and then 30 seconds later opened up this letter that this is definitely handmade. Cade definitely made this.
Love a handmade card.
I think he potato stamp printed it, maybe?
You know what? Potato stamps are great. Also, is this the Netrunner font?
Wouldn't that be ironic or something? Hi, everybody, and welcome to a brand new episode of Lucky Paper Radio, the Magic the Gathering Pewd Cod.
Starting off strong.
Let's just take that again. If you want to put this at the end of the episode, Matthew, you're welcome to.